While you were healing in silence, karma was already speaking, in ways you couldn't see, but they couldn't escape. You see, life doesn't always settle its debts in front of an audience. It collects quietly, through the restless nights, through the fading friendships, through the empty victories they post for strangers to see. This isn't a video about revenge. It's about truth, and the quiet power that comes from not chasing closure, not seeking validation, not reacting. While they were performing happiness, you were rebuilding something far more valuable: inner peace. In this video, you'll discover 5 silent signs that someone is already receiving the karma they earned. Not through chaos, but through erosion. Not through punishment, but through reflection. These signs are subtle, but unmistakable. We'll use timeless Stoic philosophy to understand what happens when people betray your trust, and how to rise above it without losing yourself. Whether you've been lied to, manipulated, or dismissed, this guide will help you break the emotional pattern and rebuild strength from within. Because true peace is built in quiet moments, and karma never misses, it just waits for the noise to fade. If you've ever felt broken, but refused to break others, this video is for you. Like this video if it resonates. Subscribe to the channel for more Stoic wisdom and emotional clarity. Let's build a life that needs no revenge, only purpose. One gradual loss of what they took for granted. They walked away like nothing had happened. You stood in silence, not because you had nothing to say, but because you chose to speak through your absence. While they moved on quickly, or so it seemed, something else had already begun. Something far more patient than revenge and more exact than justice. Karma had started to subtract. It doesn't come in thunder or spectacle. It arrives in unnoticed shifts. One day, the people they laughed with stopped returning messages. The job offer they were banking on slipped through at the last moment. An unexplainable tension fills their new relationships, and yet nothing looks broken from the outside. That's the nature of this kind of karma. It doesn't destroy, it dissolves. Slowly, quietly, thoroughly. From the outside, it looks like a coincidence. From their perspective, it feels like a streak of bad luck. But you know better. You've seen this pattern unfold before, not in them, but in yourself, in the aftermath of pain. That same silence you used to fear is now what wraps around them. But this time, it doesn't heal. It haunts. At first, they still shine. You see it online, the highlight reels, the curated smiles, the captions about growth and clarity. And for a moment, you wonder if they really are fine. If maybe the one who caused the pain somehow got to walk away untouched. But you catch something in the eyes. Not sadness, not guilt, but absence. Like they're not even inside their own skin anymore. And you realize they didn't move on. They just moved forward without a map. The truth is, they didn't just lose you. They lost the version of themselves that only existed in your presence. The one who was believed in even when they failed. The one who was forgiven without being asked. The one who was loved beyond performance. That version no longer exists because it was built inside a connection they carelessly discarded. You might be tempted to send a message, to check in, to remind them of what they threw away. But you don't. Not because you don't care anymore, but because you finally understand the weight of your silence. They're already feeling it, more than words ever could deliver. They called you too much when you were simply consistent. They said you overreacted when you were the only one responding with heart. They rolled their eyes at your boundaries, laughed at your softness, and now they long for someone who'll understand them without needing to be explained. But no one stays. Not really. They're surrounded by people who mirror the surface, but no one touches the core. The kind of loyalty you gave isn't common, and they know that now. This is not about punishment. It's about removal. Life slowly takes away everything that no longer aligns with truth. The people they once leaned on stop showing up, not dramatically, just less. The support they used to receive effortlessly becomes conditional. The invitations are slow, the connections thin, and yet they don't collapse, they drift. That's the most merciful form of justice. You may never see the full picture, but you'll feel the shift. One day, the silence you gave them will echo louder than all the noise they tried to fill it with. That's when karma finishes what it started. A Stoic doesn't chase retribution. We observe. Not because we're passive, but because we know that time does what ego cannot. Time exposes, time rebalances, time humbles. Marcus Aurelius said, "If someone can prove me wrong and show me my mistake, I will gladly change. For it is the truth I seek, and the truth never harmed anyone." But those who refuse to reflect must live in the consequences they deny. When they stood in front of you with cold eyes and sharp words, they thought you would break. Instead, you bent toward solitude, and there you grew roots. Now, as they lose what once came easily, you've gained what they never valued: emotional grounding. You don't need to shout that you're doing better. You simply are. There will be days when bitterness tempts you, when you wonder if they'll ever see what they lost. But that question is no longer yours to carry. What they lost was never your burden. What you build from here is your responsibility. So you build, quietly. You start placing peace above closure, purpose above attention, inner clarity above outer validation, and slowly the life you rebuild no longer needs their apology to make sense. If the urge to reach out comes, pause. Ask yourself, do I want them to know, or do I need to remind myself? Then answer yourself with silence. That's the most honest conversation you'll ever have. Because in the end, you don't win by proving your worth. You win by no longer needing them to see it. That's how karma works. It doesn't chase, it doesn't argue, it doesn't humiliate, it simply removes. And what's removed is often never returned, not because life is cruel, but because peace has better use for your time. 2. Overcompensation with fake happiness. There's a moment after betrayal when silence becomes unbearable. For them, not you. You've already stepped back. You've already chosen not to chase closure. But they, the ones who caused the fracture, now stand alone with the spotlight they turned on themselves. And they don't know how to switch it off. So they shine harder, louder, brighter. Not from within, but at the surface. That's where fake happiness lives. You've seen it before. You open your phone. There they are, laughing in places you two never went. Smiling with people they barely knew while they had you. Posting captions about healing, peace, and moving forward. Every image is carefully framed. Every smile was exaggerated. Every quote aimed vaguely at growth. But when you look closer, something doesn't align. Their eyes are hollow. Their energy feels strained. And deep down, something inside you knows, this isn't peace. This is panic wearing a filter. No one truly at peace needs to prove it. You've learned that. Quiet confidence never advertises. Real healing doesn't post reminders. It lives in your tone, your presence, your ability to walk away without explanation. But those who are still trapped in guilt, regret, or unresolved ego need the world to believe what they themselves don't. So, they overcompensate. They told you once that you were too emotional, too invested, too much. Now they cry alone while pretending not to care. They said you were holding them back. Now they run in circles, trying to catch a version of themselves they abandoned the moment they let you go. They wanted freedom. What they found was fragmentation. You used to believe their performance. Back then, you'd see a post and wonder if they had truly moved on, if maybe they were happier now that you're gone. But clarity changes everything. When you stop reacting, you start seeing. That's what Stoicism trains in you. Not detachment from life, but detachment from illusion. What you're witnessing is not joy. It's a survival mechanism. A staged narrative, crafted not for others, but for the part of them that still whispers, you messed up something real. Epictetus once said, "It's not events that disturb us, but our judgment about them." When you apply that truth to this moment, it becomes clear. It's not their posts that hurt anymore. It's what you once believed about those posts that used to sting. You no longer assign them power. And in doing so, you've reclaimed your own. Think back to the early days when everything collapsed. While you sat with pain, they sprinted into distraction. New hobbies, new people, new clothes, maybe even a new version of themselves, rewritten to erase the damage. But performance is heavy. It drains. It requires constant energy to uphold. That's why it eventually cracks. And you, standing at a distance, start to notice the micro moments of dissonance, how their stories shift, how their mood flickers, how their laugh carries no warmth. You begin to feel something unexpected. Not satisfaction, not revenge, but detachment. Not coldness, but calm. It's the realization that you're not supposed to be part of this story anymore. You're watching someone live inside a play they wrote to avoid the truth. And you're no longer an actor in that script. There is no need to point it out, no need to send a message or share your own progress. That's not your role anymore. Let them perform. Let them pretend. Let them call it growth while they recycle the same wounds into different costumes. Your only task now is to protect your clarity. If you must do something, do this. Close the app. Put the phone down. Step outside. Take a breath. Feel the stillness of your own presence. That's your progress. That's your glow. It doesn't need lighting. It doesn't need likes. It only needs one thing: truth. Sometimes the most radical healing is the refusal to be pulled back into a dynamic that feeds on reaction. And sometimes, karma doesn't show up in their lives through collapse, but through exhaustion. The kind that comes from faking peace for too long. Eventually, they'll tire. Eventually, the mask slips. But by then, you'll be too far removed to even notice. You're not here to watch them fall. You're here to rise. And rising means letting go of the need to be seen, acknowledged, or validated by the very people who couldn't see your worth when it was right in front of them. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Waste no more time arguing what a good person should be. Be one." Let that be your anchor. Let that be your quiet revenge, if you even want to call it that. Because when you start building a life so grounded, so real, and so emotionally stable, even your absence becomes something they can't match. So when their joy looks too loud, remember, peace whispers. When they flaunt a new start, remember, healing doesn't post selfies. And when you start wondering if you should have stayed just a little longer, remind yourself, this version of you would have never been born if you had. Now breathe. And don't look back. They're not laughing at you. They're trying to laugh over the silence that follows losing you. You don't need to speak for karma. It already speaks every time their performance fails to quiet the truth. And every time you choose stillness instead of engagement, you become what they never expected. You become free. 3. Indirect communication and obsession. They won't say your name, but every word leads back to you. Not out loud, not in confession, but through vague captions, cryptic quotes, and the passive sentences they hope sound profound to everyone else. They speak in riddles now. Words like loyalty, energy, healing, and betrayal float in their feed without context. But you know the context. You always did. Because the silence they once used against you has now become the prison they can't escape. On the surface, everything seems casual. A shared meme, a story slide with lyrics that cut a little too close, a comment about people who never deserved their time. It's dressed as wisdom, but it bleeds regret. When you once loved someone deeply, you learn their language, even the unspoken parts. And now you recognize every line, not as strength, but as a crack in the mask they've worked so hard to hold up. At first, this kind of performance used to stir you. You'd read between the lines, feel your pulse rise, wonder if they were thinking of you. And truthfully, they are. Not because they love you, but because they still need to win against the version of you that no longer exists. That's what karma does. It turns the weight of their own choices inward. They speak in circles, trying to free themselves from a pattern they created. And each time they do, they write your name in invisible ink. This is not about obsession in the dramatic sense. It's more subtle, more stoic. It's the mental echo they can't mute. The image of who you were, standing silently in the background of their thoughts, every time they lie to themselves about what happened. The absence they didn't value has become a shadow they can't outrun. You might wonder why they do it, why they don't just move on. The answer is simpler than it seems. Unfinished guilt doesn't vanish. It needs somewhere to land. And when someone refuses to confront it directly, it finds its way out through whispers, innuendo, and performance. That's not healing. That's a haunted conscience asking the world to agree with its denial. You're not in the room, but your silence is. They tell stories to new people with pieces missing. They rewrite the past in a way that makes them look like the ones who tried. But that rewriting always needs an audience. And no story retold from guilt can ever sound whole. You've noticed it. Maybe through a mutual friend, maybe through a follower who still watches both sides. Maybe through that one message they weren't supposed to send that slipped through at 1:43 a.m. when their mask was off and their loneliness couldn't be filtered anymore. You don't answer. Not because you want to punish them, but because you've outgrown the need to be understood by someone who chose confusion over connection. You've moved beyond the story. They're still narrating. You're walking in silence. They're stuck in commentary. This isn't about ego. It's about evolution. Stoicism teaches that to respond to what doesn't serve you is to anchor yourself in what never healed you. And so you let them speak around you, about you, toward you, even if your name is never spoken. Your energy is still felt because you didn't just leave a relationship. You left a mirror. And now they're speaking to their own reflection, hoping it answers. When people post endlessly about cutting off toxic energy, they often mean the one person who saw them clearly. When they write about outgrowing the past, what they mean is, I still can't forgive myself for who I was when I had something real. And when they talk about healing out loud, they usually mean, I'm still waiting to be heard by the one who went silent. But you're not silent because you're cold. You're silent because you're whole. Because you no longer need their reaction to define your worth. Your clarity isn't built on their confusion. You're not playing that game anymore. And that alone is why their obsession continues. You don't need to clap back. You don't need to correct their version. Let their stories echo in their own chambers. Let them reach for indirect sympathy, for validation from strangers who don't know the details. Because eventually, they'll grow tired of speaking into the void. And that's when the silence you left behind will say everything you never did. Marcus Aurelius reminded us, if someone speaks ill of you, continue to live so that no one will believe them. You don't win by arguing. You win by evolving, not by being right, but by being real. And real doesn't need to announce itself. It just endures. So when the next caption shows up on your feed, or the next vague message arrives that clearly wasn't meant to be so vague, breathe. Don't react. Don't reach back. They're not calling to reconnect. They're calling to relieve the weight of what they never faced. And that's not your work to do anymore. Instead, write down what you wish you'd heard from them. Not to send, but to release. Burn it if you have to. Tear it into quiet pieces. Let it drift like the last words of a story you've already outgrown. Because healing doesn't happen in confrontation. It happens in restraint. Let them talk. Let them pretend it's not about you. Let them use poetic captions to soften what they still can't admit. You don't need to be in their life to live in their mind. That's karma, and that's freedom. 4. Loss of trust in others and self. I just don't trust people anymore. That sentence floats easily from their mouth, wrapped in calm, delivered like a boundary. But the tone is off. It's not the sound of someone who learned to protect their peace, it's the voice of someone haunted by their own reflection. Because when you've broken someone good, the hardest person to trust again isn't the world, it's yourself. They used to be open, too open. You saw it. They laughed without holding back, they spoke freely, they let others in quickly and carelessly. But somewhere along the way, after all the doors they slammed in your face and all the silence they weaponized against you, something inside them started to shift. Now they flinch before connection. They hesitate before kindness. Their eyes scan every word, looking for betrayal hidden between the lines. It's not because the world has changed. It's because they now project their own guilt onto everyone else. You remember this version of them. It didn't exist when they were with you. Back then, you were the one reading too much into things. You were the one told to relax when you asked for reassurance. You were the one who stayed up, wondering why something felt off while they slept soundly beside you, pretending the air between you wasn't getting colder each night. Now they live in that state, unsettled, suspicious, guarded, and they call it growth. But fear disguised as strength is still fear. From the outside, they might seem more mature, more private, more disciplined with their emotional energy. They'll say they've learned not to trust too easily. They'll use words like discernment, like boundaries. But when someone speaks of boundaries with bitterness, it's not wisdom, it's pain trying to build a wall. And pain builds poorly. You're not judging them. You just see what they can't admit. because you were once the safest place they had, and they abandoned that space for something that looked freer. But true freedom doesn't require running. It requires peace. And peace doesn't grow where guilt lives. Stoic philosophy teaches that trust is the fruit of integrity. Seneca wrote, "He who does wrong rarely trusts anyone else, for he knows what he is capable of." That's the core truth they live with now. Not the grand consequence, the quiet erosion. The knowing that deep down they have violated something sacred, not just in you, but in themselves. And that kind of fracture doesn't heal by staying busy or keeping people out. It heals by facing the truth without flinching. Most don't. You sense the difference even without speaking to them. They move differently. They avoid conversations that go too deep. They're suspicious of generosity. They mistake sincerity for manipulation. And when they finally meet someone who reminds them of you, not your face, but your softness, they hesitate. They stall. They sabotage it. Because now, vulnerability reminds them of the love they once called too much and now can't replicate. They don't trust others because they know what they did when they were trusted. They assume everyone's holding a knife because they once held one. And when you live in that mindset long enough, everyone becomes a suspect, including yourself. That's karma. Not thunder from the sky, but a quiet self-exile from the very thing they once took for granted. Meanwhile, you've been rebuilding. Slowly, privately, not as a reaction to what they did, but as a return to who you are. You've learned to distinguish real boundaries from trauma responses. You've learned that trust isn't something people owe you. It's something you create when you live with clarity. And clarity has become your protection. You don't need to look over your shoulder because you're not hiding anything. You don't need to scan messages for subtext because your conscience isn't burning. That's the difference between those who live aligned and those who live guarded. One trusts because they're clean. The other can't trust because they're afraid of finding someone who sees too much. If they reach out one day, and they might, it won't be because they miss you. It will be because they miss the person they were when they were with you. The version of themselves that still believed in loyalty, in gentleness, in truth. That version doesn't exist anymore. It died the moment they treated your love like a weapon and called your kindness weakness. And though they'll never admit it out loud, they feel the absence every time they're with someone who doesn't see them the way you once did. You don't need to return, not even to forgive. You've already done the harder thing. You let go. And that letting go wasn't an act of revenge. It was an act of self-respect. Because you finally understood that you weren't meant to rehabilitate someone who refuses to be honest about their own damage. So what do you do now? You keep building. You stay grounded. You live with intention. And most importantly, you stop explaining your value to people who once needed to be convinced. Write this down, if only for yourself. I don't need anyone to believe I was right. I just need to keep doing what's right. Let that be your anchor. Let that be your practice. Because trust isn't just something you give to others. It's something you rebuild in yourself. And when you stop trying to be the exception in someone else's toxic pattern, you become the rule in your own healing. Let them sit in the quiet they once gave you. Let them question everyone's motives. Let them try to decode every silence. That's no longer your reality. That's the storm they created and now have to live through without you. And you're already in the clear. 5. Meeting their mirror. Someone new entered their life. It felt magnetic, almost destined. They called it instant connection, said it was rare, real, different. And at first, they believed it. The thrill, the laughter, the spark, it looked like everything they ever claimed they didn't need. But life doesn't always gift mirrors wrapped in romance. Sometimes karma enters smiling, only to show them what they once did to someone who truly cared. You recognize the pattern before they do. The hot and cold behavior, the inconsistent affection, the subtle withdrawal when vulnerability surfaces. It's familiar, painfully familiar. Not because you've seen it from the outside, but because you once lived it. You were on the receiving end of exactly what they're now experiencing. Back then, they called you too emotional when you needed clarity. Now, they're left guessing with someone who disappears mid-conversation and blames them for caring too much. They once made you feel like your loyalty was a burden. Now they crave consistency and meet only avoidance. The emotional distance they once used as a weapon is now used against them, and it confuses them, because they don't yet realize they've entered a karmic echo chamber, a space not designed to hurt them, but to reflect them. It's easy to assume this is just a toxic relationship, but this is deeper. This is energetic symmetry. This is the universe letting them feel the weight of what they handed to others with a smile. They begged for connection, received affection, and then tried to control it. Now they're being given affection in fragments, just enough to stay hooked, never enough to feel secure. And beneath that imbalance, something inside them begins to shift. Not externally, but quietly, under the surface. That's karma doing its work, not to punish, but to correct. You don't watch with glee. You've outgrown revenge. What you see instead is recognition. You remember how confusing it was to love someone who gave just enough to keep you there, but not enough to feel safe. You remember questioning your worth every time they pulled away and blamed your reaction for the distance they created. And now, they live in that same mental loop. But the roles have reversed. This time, they're the ones overthinking. The one is rereading texts, the one waiting by the phone. What once felt like power in their hands now feels like powerlessness in their chest. But no one around them sees it, because like before, the story on the outside is carefully managed. They still smile in photos, still claim independence, but at night alone, they're asking the same questions you once whispered into your pillow. Why does this feel so uneven? Why am I not enough for them to stay fully? They won't admit the parallel. Most don't. Admitting it would mean confronting the truth, that they are now with someone who treats them the way they treated you. And that realization doesn't come in a flash. It creeps in, slowly, through repetition, through confusion, through the haunting thought that maybe, just maybe, this isn't happening to them. It's happening through them. Marcus Aurelius once said, "The best revenge is not to be like your enemy. You've chosen that path. You didn't mirror their coldness. You didn't hand back. You simply stepped away and built a life rooted in dignity." And that silent detachment became the loudest answer. They're living with someone who mirrors their emotional pattern. But unlike you, this new person doesn't explain, doesn't plead, doesn't stay. They disappear when the emotional cost gets high. They withhold affection, then flood it when it benefits them. And in that chaos, your absence begins to speak louder than ever. Because while they once made you doubt your value, now they long for someone who simply shows up the way you did. Gently, fully, honestly. They try to fix it, they overextend, they compromise their boundaries, they chase. But the more they try to earn this new person's validation, the more they realize they used to stand in that very place, the one with power, not gratitude. And suddenly their memories of you aren't annoying anymore, they're grounded. They miss the calm, the clarity, the security, but by now it's no longer available. That's not cruelty, that's a consequence. And karma doesn't punish. It educates through experience, the most effective kind. The kind that bypasses logic and hits the nervous system. The kind that rewires perspective not through theory, but through visceral lived reality. They're not being punished by the universe. They're being shown who they were by someone who treats them the way they once treated love. You no longer need them to admit it. Their silence says enough. Their exhaustion says more. And their desperation to control something that was never theirs to begin with is the final echo of a cycle you've already escaped. You didn't need them to suffer. You needed them to understand. But understanding comes in waves and not all at once. And now it's their turn to tread water without a shoreline. You, meanwhile, are far beyond that storm, no longer clinging to the need to be understood by someone trapped in their own emotional patterns. You've chosen clarity over closure, inner peace over performance, growth over revenge. And that is the final word they will never be able to outtalk. When the bitterness rises, as it sometimes will, remind yourself gently, they are no longer mine, and I am no longer who I was. That sentence is not a sword, it's a doorway. Walk through it, because they will keep spinning in the mirror they now face. And you are finally free from it. 6. While karma works on them, you build a life that needs no revenge. You didn't wait for an apology. You didn't sit around hoping they'd wake up one day and realize who you were. You didn't chase closure or try to rewrite their version of the story. Instead, you walked away. Not with bitterness, but with something far more dangerous to the one who hurt you: silence backed by transformation. While they kept circling old cycles, you started building something they could never reach again. Not every storm makes a sound. Sometimes karma doesn't arrive in breakdowns or dramatic losses. Sometimes it arrives quietly, through the slow realization that they are no longer welcome in the life they once took for granted. And while they may still talk about you in vague terms or scroll through your photos late at night, what they're truly looking at is not you, but who they used to be when they had you. They may never say it out loud, but they feel it in every small moment of their new life that lacks depth. The way conversations don't go as deep. The way affection feels is temporary. The way people don't stay, not because the world is cruel, but because they no longer offer what you once gave so freely: patience, understanding, forgiveness, presence. It's not revenge. It's a reflection. Life is showing them what they chose to lose. And while that happens in the background of their world, you're no longer on the same frequency. You've shifted your energy inward, started choosing quiet over conflict, started waking up without the need to check their story or wonder how they're doing. Because your healing stopped being about them. It became about peace. At first, that peace felt unfamiliar. You were used to chaos, used to over-explaining yourself, used to trying to fix people who never planned to repair you in return. But something changed. Not in a single moment, but through small decisions made repeatedly. Saying no when it was easier to say yes, letting go without needing them to watch. And in that consistency, a different kind of strength emerged. Not loud, not showy, but rooted. You don't talk about them anymore, not because you're suppressing, but because they no longer hold space in your nervous system. The tension is gone. The replaying of scenes is over. You don't wish them harm, but you don't wish to share air with them either. That's not hatred, that's clarity. From a distance, they may think you forgot, but forgetting is never the goal. What you did was forgive in silence, because you got tired of bleeding for someone who never learned how to stop cutting. You understood, finally, that some people don't deserve your anger. They deserve your absence. And that absence is what they feel now. Not when they're surrounded, but when the room gets quiet, when the newness wears off, when the excitement fades, when they reach for connection and find only surface. That's when they feel the weight of your presence through the void you left behind. Stoicism doesn't ask you to suppress your pain. It asks you to rise above it. Marcus Aurelius said, "The best revenge is to be unlike him who did the injury." And that's exactly what you've done. You didn't mirror their chaos. You didn't engage in pettiness. You chose stability, chose to build instead of break, chose to become what they could never imagine: untouchable. Not because you're guarded, but because you're healed. Now you operate from emotional discipline, from grounded self-worth. You protect your peace not by locking the world out, but by being selective with who gets access to your energy. And the one who once had unlimited access, they now stand outside a life they used to belong to, watching something grow that no longer includes them. Sometimes they'll try to return, not with full apologies, but with small attempts. A like, a message, a question disguised as curiosity. But it's not because they've changed. It's because they miss the version of themselves they were around you, the one who was loved despite their cracks. But that version of you, the one who tolerated, explained, begged to be understood, no longer exists. You buried that version in the silence they left you with. And in its place, someone new stands, calm, self-protected, real. The beauty of this evolution is that it requires no announcement. You don't need to post about your growth. You don't need to prove that you're winning. The depth in your eyes says it all. The softness in your boundaries speaks volumes. The life you're building is quiet but undeniable. It carries a gravity that can't be faked. And if they ever wonder what happened to you, let them. Let them sit with that question for as long as they need to. You owe them no answer. Not because you're cruel, but because your silence is now sacred. It belongs to your growth, not their redemption. Karma didn't come with a bang. It came with you choosing not to collapse, choosing to stand back up, dust off your dignity, and move forward without needing anyone to understand why. That is the path of the Stoic, not reaction, but restoration. And while they are still searching for someone to forgive them without accountability, you are becoming someone who no longer waits to be seen. You see yourself. You hold your own space. You rise. So write this truth into your days, even when it aches. You don't need to prove anything to the people who couldn't see your worth. You only need to keep becoming someone they will never again have the privilege to reach. That isn't revenge. That is evolution. That is what karma respects. And that is what they will never unsee. In the end, karma does not shout. It whispers. It moves slowly but surely, returning to each person exactly what they put into the world. While they tried to manipulate or dismiss your worth, you chose something far more powerful. You chose emotional discipline, silence, and a life built on integrity. That choice was not a weakness, it was a strength. The kind of strength that doesn't demand recognition but commands respect. Stoicism teaches us not to chase revenge but to rise with calm determination. While others drown in their own cycles, you build momentum through steady habits, mental clarity, and emotional detachment. You don't need to explain. You don't need to prove. You simply keep showing up, grounded, focused, and untouchable from within. Let them wonder. Let karma handle what you no longer carry. And as you walk forward, let your peace be the loudest statement you ever make. If this message resonated with you, share your own story in the comments. How have you seen karma unfold? Not through revenge, but through quiet transformation. And if you found strength in this reminder, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more Stoic strategies for emotional freedom, resilience, and unstoppable self-worth.